Hello and welcome to Logicast Episode 1. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO of Logicata, and I'm joined today by my colleague and friend, John.
Hi, I'm John, lead cloud engineer at Logicata, and I'm a friend that you pay for.
I think that's the case with most of my friends, John. Say no more. Welcome to the first edition of Logicast. Any of you that already follow me on social media will know that I produce a weekly newsletter called the Weekly AWS News Roundup, and I also do a video on a Friday just introducing the news articles that are circulated in that roundup. So in the podcast, the Logicast podcast, we're actually going to take a deeper dive into some of those articles and just have a little bit of a chat about it, have some opinion, some discussion, and hopefully a little bit of fun along the way. So I'm going to act as the host because I don't know as much about AWS as John does. So I'm going to be putting questions to John as we talk about some of the articles. So as it's our first podcast, we thought we maybe should start with something rather simple. And there was a very timely article in the news this week called What is AWS Hosting? You couldn't have timed it any better, quite frankly. I'm kind of hoping that anybody who is interested in and listening to or watching this podcast already knows what AWS hosting is. But if you don't, then this is a great place to start. So, John, what is AWS hosting?
95% of my career for the past 5 years.
Fabulous.
I know, right? So AWS hosting. AWS, yeah, fun. It is someone else's server. At its core, it's someone else's server. The article itself sort of goes into, internet services and standalone servers and all that kind of thing. And yeah, we can talk about that if you like, but I think that's a little bit dull. AWS was born out of, as I understand it, Amazon were scaling up their data centers to cope with Black Friday. And then they realized that they were running at this ridiculous capacity all year when they needed it for maybe 3 days. So they decided, in their ineffable wisdom, to rent it to other people. It kind of grew from there, and we have AWS as we know it now. Calling it someone else's Linux server is somewhat deprecating, a little bit self-defeating. It's not inaccurate, but you will annoy people calling it that. AWS is what do they call it? Hyperscale? Is that the word?
Yeah, a hyperscaler, I think, is a reasonable description, of which there are 3, maybe some would argue 5, but 2 of them are pretty insignificant. Can you guess which ones I'm talking about, John? Oh, they weren't
Is
even.
It Alibaba and IBM?
No, IBM wasn't even on my list of 5, to be honest. So it was the red one.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, wonderful.
Let's make it 6 then. 6 hyperscalers, but yeah. I think IBM is more of a hyper shrinker at the moment, but that's just my personal opinion. So.
Oh, they're always fun to rag on. Yeah, so AWS, basically, they run quite effectively data centers, and you can rent compute and various other bits and pieces from them for money. Because obviously for money. But the upshot of doing it through this is you're not having to buy your servers, you're not having to provision network, you're not having to run cooling, you're not having to worry about stupid amounts of 3-phase power and all that nonsense. You just pay an hourly rate or a monthly rate, depending on the service, for what you're using. You want a server? Pay for it hourly. You want some storage? Pay for it in prorated months, whatever. You want to run some queues? That's great. You just pay for the messages. You want to store some database stuff? That's fine. You just pay for what you're storing. Easy peasy.
And boy, do people pay for it. I think the run rate is now up to something like $71 billion annually.
Yeah.
And also,
there's a link in my recent article talking about AWS. Funny that. I do this for a living and I talk about it and I write about it. There's a link in that talking about how Amazon makes its money. AWS made 100% of Amazon's operating profit in 2021. Yep. Yes, okay, adjust for pandemic money, but still, it's a bonkers amount of money.
Absolutely. It's and it's crazy that the average person on the street has never heard of Amazon Web Services. When I try to explain to people what I do, particularly people like my mother or other members of my family, it usually ends up back at, well, it's got something to do with computers, hasn't it? Or, oh, is it to do with Amazon.com, the website where I buy all my stuff? And it's kind of is, but
glazed over.
It's also very, very different in many ways. So yeah, but what else does the article tell us?
Well, it talks about things like, to be fair, I want to touch on that. People haven't heard of it. They've almost certainly used it. If you've got a Netflix subscription, you've had content from Amazon, AWS. They are probably the biggest well-known name that sit on it. And they serve through really, as far as I understand it, really old school, just servers and scaling. That's all they do, which is mad. But yeah, you might not have heard of it. You've used it, promise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the apps that we're going to talk about in one of the later sections, I think many people will have heard of, if not used those apps, which are all based on AWS. So I don't know what percentage of the internet is based on AWS. I wouldn't like to make up the statistic.
No, I wouldn't like to guess.
But it's a pretty high percentage. I think in terms of their market share, they have around 50 to 60% of the cloud computing market share.
It's more than 50%.
Yeah. I think it's sort of 60% of the cloud computing market share. So that's absolutely enormous in terms of the sites and the applications that are hosted on AWS. So,
here's a good one. WordPress engine, which provides managed WordPress hosting, which if you want to use WordPress, it's not a bad option, uses AWS. And if I remember rightly, something like 30% of the internet is in WordPress in one form or another. And a good big percentage of that is hosted by WP Engine because, they're the people that make it.
Yeah, and I think you're talking literally hundreds of thousands of websites hosted on WP Engine. So, it's absolutely, people will have used AWS pretty much every day of their lives, I would imagine. The way that everything
it's
is
steady.
going.
I'm not that young.
No, I didn't mean from birth until now. I just mean in the current climate, they will be using it every day of their lives. So the article gives us quite a good overview of what AWS hosting is. But John, where could you find out a little bit more about AWS?
It's funny you should ask. I actually wrote something about that recently. So on the Logicata blog, I have put together a glossary of not all the services, because there's, I don't know how many, but it's more than 200, and I value my time. But of all of the sort of the big ticket items that you'd want, EC2, servers, storage, website things, networking, databases, all that kind of thing. So on the blog, it is simply AWS Glossary.
So that's logicata.com/blog. You'll find it is the most recent post there. Easy enough to find and navigate to. If you want to understand what some of those TLAs stand for, TLA, of course, being an acronym for three-letter acronyms. And our industry is, of course, driven by those. In fact, I've built my career just on understanding what every TLA or FLA stands for. Don't necessarily understand what goes on behind it, but so long as you know what the acronym stands for, you can really start to sound like you know what you're talking about. So
you've got more certificates than I do. You come on.
Yeah, that's only because I know the TLAs, and those, of course, are all those are all multiple guess answers as well. So I'm just modest, John. I'm very modest. So the next article we thought we'd pick on, simply because I saw quite a bit of noise about it this week, was this article on the new Filecache service that Amazon have launched. So tell me a bit about that, John. What is it? What can it do for me?
So it can run you up a big bill. Filecache is actually quite cool. It's a way of hooking together through just normal Common or Garden network interface technologies. It's hooking together up to 8 S3 buckets, or what was the other one? I forget what the other one is, or something else, into a cache. Filecache, it's a cache. You can hook up a whole bunch of things to the back end of it and present it to your applications, through your servers, to your on-premises servers, whatever you like. Just as a network drive. Great, happy days. The upshot of this is, I mean, Amazon in their article explain it through sort of two scenarios, two use cases, right? The first one being you have a very large data set and you want to move that workload to the cloud, but you don't want to move the entire data set to the cloud because regulatory reasons or anything like that. You can just put this in the middle and the cloud can talk to it and so on and so on. Great, happy days. The other example, which I think is probably more likely, is you have a traditional application that uses Unix fundamentals, sed, pipes, whatever, and you cannot, for one reason or another, refactor that application to use S3 native commands. You just can't. You don't have time, you're not allowed, whatever. You put Filecache in the middle, and because it's treated like a normal network interface, you're golden. It'll just read and write from it. Happy days. It's up to 8 S3 buckets or 8 NFS file systems. So that could be on-prem file systems for going one way or S3 buckets for going the other way. Easy peasy. There are a couple of annoyances with this. The up to 8, fine, great, wonderful. In S3 land, that's great because S3 buckets are functionally unlimited. So you can have unlimited storage, but you've got to be kind of a bit picky about what you're exposing back to your on-prem network or your applications. So you can't just sort of go, here's my whole account available through this endpoint. You've got to sort of provision them quite thoughtfully. Yeah. And the other is the cache size is a minimum of 1.2 TB, which in old language is a terabyte, I think. Don't quite understand how they work. So there's a minimum cache size, which is a little bit irritating. You don't actually get charged for Filecache itself, but you do get charged for the resources sitting underneath it. So if you're provisioning a couple of terabytes worth of cache, you are going to pay for it. And of course, on top of that, you pay for data egress at EC2 rates. Well, it's not is it EC2 rates? I'd have to check. I don't think it's at EC2 rates. So, but you do pay for it.
Are you paying then for the storage, even if it's not used? If you provision a cache of a certain size, do you pay for all of the storage, regardless of whether or not there's anything in your cache?
Yes, you do. Okay. So it is 1,000 megabytes is a TB, okay, and you pay one. It depends on the region, but let's look at London because that's our closest one. You pay $1.56.3 per gigabyte per month, so it's not cheap. And then on top of that, you pay 2 cents per gigabyte, so it's not the same as EC2, of data transfer out from your cache. And then that's out to the internet, I think. And then in and out of cache between availability zones or VPC peering connections is charged at 1 gigabyte in either direction. So it's a very good way of running up a data transfer bill.
So what might be the use cases for you to want to run up that bill?
I think
who would
I think Amazon have covered it. So in their article, they covered it quite nicely, to be really honest. The two big obvious ones are you have cloud processing that needs access to an on-premises data set, in which case you hook up your NFS to that and you just move the data through it. Or you have something on premises that needs access to a cloud-based data set, and you can hook things up through there. Or, of course, it's all in the cloud already, but you can't refactor your application to take advantage of cloud API calls and things. So that's kind of the obvious ones. If you think about it as a sort of a competitor to storage gateway in the putting data from on-prem into the cloud, that sort of starts to make sense. It's that plus a few extra bits.
Got it. Cool.
Clear as mud.
Yeah. Read the article if you want to know more. It's in the newsletter. So let's change gear a bit now and talk about the wellness movement. We saw an article this week about AWS customers who use the AWS cloud to make mental health and wellness resources more accessible. So wellness, of course, is becoming much higher on everyone's agenda, particularly with the amount of data that we now have about our own personal wellness from devices like the iPhone, the Apple Watch, other brands are available, but those are the ones that immediately spring to mind. In fact, I was participating in some market research earlier this week for a well-known tap company who don't like to be known as a tap company. They like to be known as a wellness and hydration company, because obviously water is critical to wellness and hydration. But it's pretty exciting to look at some of the design concepts that those guys have got coming down the line in the future, tying into some of the sort of health and wellness apps that are, or health and wellness app vendors that are already available, and how we can actually link those into devices in our home, like taps, to provide us with not only hydration but also potentially nutrition in the form of supplements and things like that. So some pretty exciting stuff coming down the line with on the wellness side of things. But yeah, talk me through some of the AWS customers in this article, John, that we've seen.
So the first one on their list is Calm, and I have actually used that before because I'm a complete ball of unbridled stress. I have used that before. You can blame my children. And it's saying that they use Amazon Personalize, which is actually quite cool, because what they're doing is they're using ML, which it's just a bunch of if statements, really. They're using machine learning to personalize the interface and the experiences that the users are getting. So if you're doing lots of the same sorts of things, it'll start recommending the same sorts of things. If you're kind of all over the place with what you're doing, it will start recommending things that are kind of smoothing you out a little bit, I think, into kind of, we think you like this, we think you should do that, and so on, which is quite cool. What it's also saying is content generated by Amazon Personalized led to a 3.4% uptick in daily practice, which is, I mean, it's not a big number, but something like 100 million users or something silly. So it's a large number of people, if it's not a big percentage.
I'd be interested to know how they measure that. That it was the content generated, because it could just be the fact that the whole world is going mad and we all need to calm down a bit, and people are cottoning onto these things and starting to use them all. I haven't used Calm myself, but I used another one called Balance, which is a very similar thing for a bit of meditation and mindfulness, and I think this sort of thing is really catching on. So pretty cool to see how these guys are using AWS for that. What else have we got? What's this sound off?
It's a medicine platform. So veterans and armed forces connecting to clinicians and trained peers, that's quite cool, actually. I'm obviously not ex-military. I mean, look at the state of me. But connecting armed forces and service veterans and these sorts of things with both peers and with medics and stuff is incredibly important, because they have, I mean, it's not higher than general public, but they do have a fairly high incidence of things like PTSD, and if you start kind of downhilling from there, it's going to be really nasty really quickly. So the ability to connect people back to medics and stuff is incredibly important. And what this is doing, really cool, is it's doing it completely anonymously without connecting user data at all. So it's kind of addressing the stigma and not wanting to be known for it and that sort of thing by saying that, well, you won't. We don't know who you are. They don't know who you are. You know that they're a doctor or they're a peer, and that's about the size of it. What they're doing here with AppFlow is it's a fully managed service that allows the secure data transfer between things. So they don't have to worry about getting the data between S3 and Redshift and the front end and the back end and all. It's just done securely.
That's pretty cool. What about Spring's sleep medicine? Oh, no, a study from...
I was going to make a really bad joke.
Yeah. To do with sleep disturbances, isn't it? So
yeah.
Having
children, that's a sleep disturbance. I think what they're doing here is it's more shilling for ML, which, to be fair, is cool. Generally, it's just saying ML to glean data from habits and share them back with the user. It's not saying they use a specific service or that they're a poster child for that. But again, it's another company that's sitting on AWS that's taking advantage of AWS's managed ML services. And there's a whole raft of them. But Yeah, managed ML is great because it means you don't have to worry about having massive GPU farms to train your models and all that jazz. You just use their pre-trained model, job done.
This whole world of online health and wellness, telemedicine, etc., is really cool. I've been a Babylon user for the last 5 years or so, since I last worked in central London, and I have not set foot in a doctor's surgery for all of that time, because I've been able to access all of the healthcare I needed wherever I am in the world from my iPhone, and I think that's the future. My wife is still stuck in this world of having to get up and start hammering the redial button at 8 o'clock every morning to get through and talk to the angry receptionist in the local doctor's surgery who really doesn't want to speak to anybody, and that is definitely not the future. Certainly. The youth of today will not tolerate that sort of experience. It's not what they're used to when everything is available on demand. So it's really cool to see what's going on in that space.
TikTok doctors next.
Yeah, I don't even. What's TikTok, John? You'll have to explain to me. It's passed me by.
Oh, maybe another time.
So, the last article I think that we were just going to dive into is this Compute Optimizer article. Now supporting 37 new EC2 instance types and new memory metrics for Windows instances. That's a bit of a mouthful. What does that mean?
Yeah, so Compute Optimizer it's a bit of a cool thing, really. One of the things that consultants, like me, like to tell customers is you need to right-size your instances. Okay, what the hell does that mean? What you'll find from people coming from on-prem setups, from historic setups, is that they've got, much like AWS did, their servers and things configured for peak traffic, because they have no ability to scale, so they have to be configured to take the maximum amount of traffic that they could possibly see and just be massively underutilized the rest of the time. Compute Optimizer looks at your account and tells you where you've done that, and then tells you, you could actually use things like auto-scaling groups or whatever to account for this instead, so that you don't have to be sitting at peak maximum 120% capacity all the time and paying for it all the time. What Compute Optimizer has done in this article is they've added 37 new instance types, including the bare metal ones, which is really cool. And it's got some new metrics available for Windows, which is great, because if you're stuck using Windows for one thing or another, having more accurate memory utilization is one of the key drivers for working out if you're on too big an instance, because the way that instances are provisioned within AWS is based on, they just give you sizes, but they have amount of virtual CPU, amount of virtual RAM, and then you can sort of tack disks on separately. So if you don't have good metrics for how much virtual memory you're using and how much virtual CPU you're using, you don't have a good way of determining if you're over provisioned or not. And what they've done is they've just added a whole bunch of them in, so that you now have more instances that you can work out whether you're over provisioned or under provisioned on, which is really handy.
And is it just a recommendation engine, or does it actually automate some of the optimizations?
It's just recommendations.
Yeah.
It would be really dangerous if it started automating its, we definitely need to start downsizing your servers for you. No, that could be quite dangerous. So no, it's just recommendations.
Yeah. But it's always good to keep on top of these things.
Which then you come and talk to people like me to, yes it is. And then you come and talk to people like me to come and help you do it.
Absolutely, yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, I think that is all of the articles that we were going to look to deep dive into this week. So I guess it's now time to wrap up the first episode of Logicast. We've made it to the end, John. I think we've done quite well. It is actually our first take as well. So go easy on us if you're listening to this. It is our first time. Please be kind. Please be gentle. But we'll be back. We're going to do this weekly. So as I mentioned, the Logicata AWS Weekly News Roundup is a newsletter that you can sign up for, having delivered to your inbox once a week. You'll see me on LinkedIn and other social channels talking about the contents of that newsletter in a short 3 or 4 minute video. And now the Logicast podcast, we're going to record it weekly. It's going to be available from all major podcast distribution channels in both audio and video format. So I guess that brings us to the end of episode 1. Anything else you'd like to add, John?
No, I'm enjoying your purple lighting though. That's cool.
It's blue and orange, like the colours in the Logicata logo. Subliminal messaging in light. At least that's what it's supposed to look like. So
That's what it's supposed to be. What are you wearing today? You're on Captain or Super Cloud?
I'm
today?
on an orange Captain Cloud t-shirt today, which you can't see. It's obscured by my microphone, but you do have this handy sticker here, which looks very much like the design on the front of my t-shirt, so you can get the idea. And of course, we do give those t-shirts away every week in a free prize draw, which if you check out my news roundup email newsletter or videos, you'll find a link to the free prize draw there as well. So if you want to win some Logicata Captain Cloud or Super Cloud swag, you can do that once a week in our newsletter. So let's wrap it up there. Thanks a lot for your insights there, John, into the AWS news for the last week. We'll be back next week to deep dive into some more of the week's AWS news. Thanks for listening. Cheers.